what I want to talk about, however, is how bookmarks look like from underneath, right? So what's the JSON markup we're getting for bookmarks, and what can we do with that? How can we interpret it? So just as a quick recap, that's the oopsie, sorry, I always mess up my here we go, my keys. So that's the context menu you get when selecting a bookmark in Power BI Desktop. There are a bunch of options: data, display, current page, and then down here there's a choice between all visuals and selected visual. So just something to keep in mind, because we'll see that in terms of the underlying JSON in a second. Also as a reminder in terms of what bookmarks do and don't do, I put this here. Bookmarks basically capture, if you want to, filter or slicer state, what the current page is, the selection state for visuals. So for instance, if you select a particular category in a column chart or so, that's captured as part of the bookmark. Visibility, so whether or not a particular visual is hidden or not, and also the focus or spotlight view is captured. What isn't captured are report level filters, as an example. So they are never contained in a particular bookmark. So this report here has a few bookmarks set up, and something very simple I've got here. This is pretty much Bookmarks 101. I've got a square and a circle on a page, and then I created bookmarks allowing me to show or hide them. That's pretty much using visibility. Again, we'll look into the underlying code for that in a second. The other example is slightly more interesting. In fact, that's an example we're using at my workplace, and we have done so for quite a while. So the business problem here is I want to allow users to interact with date selections in two different ways. I want to allow them to do relative date selection, so basically using the relative date slicer we're looking at. But alternatively, I want to allow them to actually use a hierarchy. That effectively is not only a different view mode as far as the slicer is concerned, but it also requires the slicer to actually have different fields, right? So if we're looking at the fields which are used here, we've got fiscal year, fiscal quarter, fiscal month, obviously. If I go back to that one, I only have my date field here. Again, that's not something which bookmarks would allow you to do, right? A bookmark captures all sorts of visual state, but it will not allow you to actually change which fields are selected, which means the only possible solution for that is that you actually use two separate slicers, and you use bookmarks to toggle back and forth between them. One of the tricky bits here is to ensure that whilst, for instance, the relative date slicer is hidden, it also has to be reset, otherwise it would still be effective in the background. So that's another example. Looking at a spotlight bookmark, we've got that here. Always important to reset the focus mode before doing anything else. Otherwise, as you can see, other bookmarks would still take effect, but sort of hidden in the background. So those are a few examples. Let's look at what that looks like in terms of JSON code. So if we go here, and let me also make this a little bigger for your benefit. So first of all, prior to the latest version of pbi-tools, there was very limited support for bookmarks. So I'm basically looking at the report we've just looked at in PBI Desktop, and until and including RC1, bookmarks are basically extracted as part of the report level JSON, the report level config file, right? That one. And you can see here, just looking at the line numbers, it can get pretty wild, right? So basically in here, this is where all my bookmarks are encoded. And I basically have 1160 or so lines of code. That is not very manageable, as you can imagine, right? I mean, obviously there is a structure in here, and I can see, for instance, I've got two bookmarks at the top level. So one of them is called Dual Slicer, which happens to have some children. So those are nested bookmarks. The other one is called Spotlight. That one doesn't have any children. That is basically a bookmark on its own. But again, as you can see, there's a lot of markup in here, and it also means you basically get merge hell if you collaborate on the same report and different people change bookmarks. You will have changes all over the place. So in order to address that, and that's what we're looking at exclusively today, the latest preview, which ultimately is going to come out as RC2, has a dedicated bookmark subfolder within the report folder. There we go. And that one basically expands the bookmark payload and the various JSON definitions into a folder structure that represents the hierarchy within Power BI Desktop. So if I bring this report back here and just make this a little smaller. So over here we can see I've got three top-level bookmarks, all visuals mode, dual slicer, filters pane. We can see exactly that over here. All visuals mode, dual slicer, filters pane, right? If I then open up dual slicer as an example, that one has three children, Spotlight, fiscal hierarchy, and relative date. We've just seen that. If I go into the source code view, that's precisely what's happening, right? We've got Spotlight, fiscal hierarchy, relative date. Basically finally closing a gap here as far as bookmarks are concerned, but not getting the exact same granularity and visibility we've had for other parts of the report in the model previously. So that's that. And it works both ways, right? So if you extract, you get this. If you compile, it all goes back into a PBIX file. So what do bookmarks look like internally? So each one of them is represented in JSON like everything else in reports. This one is just a grouping folder, if you will. So there is nothing else to it other than a display name and an internal name. Only bookmarks that actually do something have a bit more to them. So let's have a look here at this one. All right, cool. So this is the relative date bookmark. Remember that one does two things. It basically shows the date slicer that happens to be linked to the date field, and it hides the date slicer that is linked to a date hierarchy. and it also resets the date hierarchy slicer, right? So basically it has to do 3 things. So let's look at how it's doing that. First of all, we've got options here. Remember when I showed the introductory slide, right? We've got data display in current page enabled, and it says suppress data false. So we basically have a sort of reverse logic here. Suppress data false means data is enabled, right? So it's not suppressed. And false happens to be the default here. So it basically means that all those options are currently enabled. So the Power BI Desktop doesn't always emit every single property here unless it's actually set to true. So the other thing we have, apply only to target visuals. Can we see that here? Yes, selected visuals, right? This is actually very interesting, and this is where pbi-tools comes in super handy, right? Because first of all, selected visuals is probably the option you're always going to work with, right? All visuals has very limited practical use cases, but what Power BI Desktop does not give you, or at least I haven't figured out how you would find that. Once you've created a bookmark with selected visuals, there's absolutely no way for you to figure out which ones were selected, right? You sort of have to guess, or you have to remember. But you can see I've got my selection pane open here. So even though I've got the bookmark selected, it does not tell me, right? It's basically write only. It will never come back and tell me what it was. So this is one very important practical use case already, because looking at the source code, I can see those were the 2 visuals selected, right? Now, unfortunately, only the internal IDs are provided here, but it's not a big deal because you can find them quite easily. So if you go to the dual slicer page and visual containers, it's relatively straightforward because we only happen to have 3 visuals here, and the third one happens to have the ID in the folder name. So that basically means we know for sure that it can only be the other 2 which are captured here, right? So you have to be a little bit of reverse lookup, if you will. If you want to see this for sure, go into the visual folder, go to config, and then up here we've got name. So that's D911 for that one. And here we've got 884E. If we then go back to our bookmark, we've got D911 884E. So that's how things are linked together. And the only other thing left here is basically effectively a snapshot of your entire report. So this is what bookmarks do, right? So when you create them, it basically takes a snapshot of the current state of your active page, as well as all the visuals that were on that page when the bookmark was created. Quite important to know, right? Because you can see the page has 3 visuals. My bookmark has 3 visuals, even though I've selected to only apply the bookmark to the 2 visuals specified here. I still have A7B, the column chart. I still have that in here. That's one of the reasons why the entire bookmark payload is so gigantic, because it always captures everything, even though it's not needed. So that's that. If we then go into this one, so this is one of the slicers. Let's see what we've got here. So we've got filters. Then we've got the visual definition, where we've got objects, active projections, expansion state, and then down here we've got display. So that's actually the key thing, right? Remember, the bookmark needed to do 3 things for us: hide the other slicer, unhide the relative slicer, and reset the Fiscal hierarchy slicer. So this is how the hiding is happening, and then the reset is happening via filters. So those are visual level filters, and we can see that filter is for fiscal year. This one is for fiscal quarter. And then this one is for fiscal month. Here we go. And because I'm only referencing the from, if you will, you know, I'm only referencing the field as opposed to also specifying some values that effectively resets any filters on those three fields. So this is basically what we've got here. If we then go to the other slicer, the one that's meant to be seen, we do not have the hidden property here because the default is not to hide, right? So that one only shows up when you're actually hiding something. Yeah, and so this is what we're getting here in terms of the visuals. We also have page level filters, as we can see. They are always captured, but they're only in effect with the data option enabled. And then we've looked into this one already. So going to the fiscal hierarchy bookmark, we will basically see exactly the same thing, just with the hidden property set slightly differently. So here we've got those two target visual names. We've got apply only to target visuals. We've got suppress data false, do not suppress data. And then we can see here, this one is now visible, and that one, by contrast, is hidden. So here we go. All right. So one interesting thing, which again is something you can only tackle with pbi-tools by basically hacking the underlying source code, is the filter pane, and whether or not it's actually expanded or collapsed is always captured as part of the bookmark definition, which is something which is super annoying if you only use Power BI Desktop. So basically, currently we can see the filter pane expanded, right? If I collapse it, you know, I'm looking at this from a user point of view now, right? I'm the end user. I don't want to have to deal with the filter pane. I just want to focus on the actual report page. And then as a user, I'm selecting the fiscal hierarchy. Look what's happening. The filter pane comes back. And why? Because when the report creator created the bookmark, they happen to have the filter pane expanded, and so that's now captured as part of the bookmark definition. If they had done it the other way around, if they had created a bookmark with the filter pane collapsed and the user had expanded it and wanted it to be kept expanded, the opposite would happen, right? So even though the users expanded the filter pane, it would actually then be collapsed. So this is, from my point of view, definitely a usability problem in Power BI Desktop, but pbi-tools to the rescue, because we can change that. So if we go back to the bookmark definition, there is one section I haven't shown you yet. So this is at the bookmark level. We've got objects here. And this one, outspace pane, happens to be the internal code name for filter pane. Don't ask me why. So and as you can see, this is the object name, this is the property, and this is the value, right? So this one says that bookmark for outspace pane sets expanded to true. And again, the reverse, if the filter pane had been collapsed at the time of bookmark creation, it would say false here. So what I can do now, I can actually go in here and simply remove this whole thing, like so. Basically just keep an empty object there. And if I then go and save and compile that into a new pbi-x file, that problem will be gone, right? So why don't we do that? Let me save, and let me make sure I do it for both of them. So fiscal hierarchy as well as relative date. Let me go here, remove that whole guy. Right, so, let me then compile this. So pbi-tools, compile, right, so out path, let's do bookmarks demo.pbi-x. There we go. Right, it only takes a second. We can see there's a new file here. So if I now go and open that and open bookmarks demo, and then use those two bookmarks, no matter whether or not filters is expanded or collapsed, it will always stay. If I go to fiscal hierarchy, it stays expanded. If I collapse it and I go to relative date, it stays collapsed. If I go back to hierarchy and it is collapsed, it stays collapsed. If I've got it expanded and I go back, it stays expanded. There we go. So it's one little trick where sort of hacking the underlying source code can be quite valuable. But nonetheless, even just for visibility and for change tracking, particularly since bookmarks are such a black box, right? As we've seen, in the UI, you have no way of knowing whether a developer, may have updated a bookmark, but with the wrong visual selection, for instance. For that one, pbi-tools is going to be incredibly handy because you can see precisely what's changed.